as you go up the ladder in an organization, it's much less about you. It's much more about your ability to empower others to do great things. And it's way more about listening than talking. And that took me years to realize. And I've only come to realize that in recent years. We also have this view of the leader who's never quits, they're so resilient, they don't give up. She's amazing because in the face of all adversity, she kept the organization going. The best leadership skill you can develop that's the most underrated is knowing when to quit.
Welcome back to Neuroconversant Leadership, where we talk about effective leadership and communication, especially in the STEM workplace. I'm Jeremy Doran, and my passion is to help great engineers become great leaders. Today, we have with us Sebastien Page. Sebastien, welcome.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm super excited to do this. We're recording this early in the new year, so time for good resolutions. One being, let's do great podcast content.
This is a great first step for the year.
Yes, absolutely. I'm super excited. Just came back from vacation.
Perfect. Where'd you go?
We went to Newport Beach, where we tend to stay because we used to live there, and then Utah for ski. We had pretty bad snow, but we made the most of it.
Nice. And where do you live now?
I live in Maryland, in Howard County.
Oh, great. So, yeah, it's a little bit chillier here than it was in California, but that's okay.
Yeah, it's always interesting to pack for ski and California weather at the same time. It's an optimization problem.
Yeah.
And we have a science-oriented audience.
Perfect. So on that topic, tell us what it is that you do.
I'm Chief Investment Officer at Rowe Price. I've been in the rough and tumble world of money management for about 25 years. And a few years ago, I was pretty stressed at work. And not only was I stressed at work, but I was stressing about stressing.
Ooh.
So I started looking into sports psychology. I talked to a sports psychologist. I discovered positive psychology, got completely hooked on the research because I'm a research nerd. I like to read papers and I like to write. And a few years later, here we are with the book, The Psychology of Leadership, which talks about not money management, actually, talks about principles of positive psychology.
I love it. And what made you reach out to a sports psychologist? Because that's not a natural avenue, I think, for someone in business, especially finance, to reach out to a sports person. So how did that come about?
So this person, his name is Dr. Daniel Zimmett. He lives around where I am in Maryland. And he's a super interesting person. And I wanted to talk to him because, not only is he a sports psychologist, well, the short answer, by the way, is there are lots of analogies between sports and investing. But this particular sports psychologist, Daniel Zimmett, is a fascinating person. He's also a top athlete. He has 40 national titles in the sport of handball. Now, for our audience, handball is kind of like squash, but you're whacking the ball with your hands. It's a niche sport. You often see this in movies. People play handball in prison for some reason. I would tease Dr. Zimmett, like, did you go to prison? Is that where you learned handball? For the record, that's not where he learned handball. But he has 40 national titles in the sport. So clearly he's mastered the mental game as well as the physical game. And as a sports psychologist, I just really wanted to talk to him about my stress. And Jeremy, the first time we sit down, you wanted to introduce me to the mindset behind sports psychology, which really applies to investing and, in fact, to many areas of life. He starts telling me the story of the best handball match he's ever played. It's fascinating because he's emotional. And the match took place 10 years prior. He remembers everything about it. He's telling me the ball hit this wall at that point in the match. And then at some point, he's telling the story about how he was on his knees and made an extreme shot and made the point. But then it's the biggest letdown ever because very nonchalant, he finishes the story by saying, and then I lost the next 2 points. And I interrupt and go, "You lost your best handball match ever." And that was the point for him. It was his best handball match ever because as a sports psychologist that day on the set, it was about mastery. It was not about ego. The score did not matter. He realized that day, as he was playing a much, much stronger opponent, that he had seen a step change in his ability to play the game. So he starts talking about the mastery orientation versus the ego orientation, which is a big part of sports psychology. And that's how I got into it. I got completely hooked. I started reading the papers. I've published many papers in financial economics, but I started reading in sports psychology and then in positive and then in personality psychology and became just absolutely fascinated by this research. And that's how I started writing about it. Because to me, it's super interesting because I'm not a consultant or an academic. I'm a leader, I'm chief investment officer. I go to work every day. I need to lead teams in difficult environments and deal with stress and resilience. At the same time, I'm super interested in research and I love to write. So I think I have this unique combination to eventually what led to the psychology of leadership.
People with interesting combinations are the most fun to talk to. So I'm glad you're here.
I appreciate that.
A phrase that I recently heard, and you can tell me if this applies, is the only person you're competing with is the former version of yourself. Meaning, like, all you really need to do is get better at what you do and not compare yourself to other people. Is that kind of his point?
It's absolutely part of the mastery mindset. But if you think about it, I think everybody in our audience will agree with that, right? You're only competing with the prior version of yourself. Improvement is only what matters. But what happens in real life? Like we actually care and it's okay to care and we should want to win and we should be competitive. However, it's much easier to approach it from a mastery perspective. Mastery means I'm excited because I'm getting better at what I do for the sake of getting better. In the literature, there's an example that authors like to use. It's golfing. And I got to say, Jeremy, for the record, I cannot play golf to save my life. This is just research. When they talk about mastery versus ego orientation, they compare two golfers. The ego oriented golfer looks at the score, wants to win the trophy, is devastated if they lose the match. The mastery oriented golfer clearly is also very competitive because that mastery orientation is seen in some of the top athletes in the world. But the mastery oriented player gets excited about improving their swing. Like, my swing got better today. This is awesome. That's a mastery mindset. Now take this to leading teams anywhere. It doesn't have to be sports. At work, in my business, in money management, I'm going to think about, are we getting better at gathering information that helps us make investment decisions? Not did we make money today or yesterday. Oh, our process got better. We got a new source of information. Or just simple stuff like, are we getting better at running meetings where we get the best out of everybody, the introverts and the extroverts, and where we have sort of a team dynamic that uncovers insights that makes us better forecasters and ultimately better investors? These are all mastery questions. And when business leaders set goals at the beginning of the year, rightfully, okay, they tend to focus on KPIs, key performance indicators, and they want them to be measurable. I do that too. It has to be measurable. It has to be a stretch goal. But we all forget to set mastery goal. And that's vastly underrated in how to drive your business to the next level. Just like Dr. Zimmet on the court saying, I don't care, I lost. This was my best match. I played way above my ability. I knew I was a better handball player after that match. That's the mastery versus ego, because the ego is probably bruised because he lost. And there's just so many applications of it.
So going back to golf, I am fortunate to have never been a good golfer. And I play with people who used to play competitively every once in a while, like either in high school or college. And I enjoy the game so much more than they do because they no longer play at the level that they used to, and they're always frustrated by that. And I'm just happy if I, get the ball up in the air and it goes a little ways. So it's pretty funny. The frame of reference makes such a big difference.
And golf is a mental game for sure. So is tennis. There's a famous book, The Inner Game of Tennis, about the mental aspect of sports. But you can generalize this very easily. When you think about your life, are you looking to get better at what you do for the sake of getting better? Or are you wrapped up in the ego of, am I making more money? Can I buy a better car? Which this is all fine, by the way. I'm not like, you know, I'm not one to say like, don't pursue traditional measures of success. But if you want to live in a high performing world, and if you want to lead a high performing team, if you want to be a high performing individual in a way that you're not miserable, you got to work on ego versus mastery. And most of us just don't have enough of the mastery mindset. And golf is a phenomenal example because it's frustrating. I went to play golf with my friends. I only tried a couple times and then I gave up. This is not for me. And one of the reasons why I gave up, I remember that day. It was rainy, actually. The club literally slipped out of my hands at one point. Like, this was the most embarrassing golf experience you can imagine. But my friend playing next to me, he's a really good golf player. And you know what? He was frustrated about 90% of the time. His ego was wrapped into it. And he wasn't playing to the best of his ability. And instead of thinking, okay, can I get better through learning from my mistakes, which sounds trite, but is really important for a mastery mindset. And that's why I'm not a golfer, because I just looked at these really talented golfer and they were struggling. At that time, I didn't know anything about mastery versus ego, but the very passionate golfers, I think a lot of them, if not most of them, have more of a mastery orientation.
I like it. And since it is recording this on January 2nd, and many people have just made their goals for 2026, I know I did. And I recently I do a blog every week, and it was about goal setting. And I proposed that everyone should make a big goal for their personal life, for their business life, and for their self-improvement. And because I'm always dealing with business people, I talk about business self-improvement. How can you get better at your job? But I think it's important to have goals in all three different areas. When you're talking to people on your team or doing it for yourself, how do you look at goal setting for a new year?
Annual goals are super important. And yes, it's better to make them measurable, but you also need to include mastery goals, getting better at uncovering insights from the research. In our case, finding new sources of insights, all the way to mundane stuff that you cannot measure, but that's super important, like running meetings better, collaborating better so that we generate better insights amongst ourselves. But I would add something, Jeremy, to this. I would add a life goal, because here's the thing is we don't really think as much as we should about very long-term goals. So for an organization, it's like, we want this company to be top 2 in the world at XYZ. And you might currently be top 25, right? That's more of a lifetime goal or a 10-year goal or a 25-year goal for a company. But for an individual, it's the same thing. And the problem is, if you look at surveys, when you ask, for example, millennials, what is your life goal? What do you think they say, Jeremy? They say 80% of them say, I want to become rich, which is fine. Look, it's fine. I mean, go for it. 50% say, I want to become famous. Those are goals that are fine, but positive psychology reveals through the Harvard study that if you look at people over their lifetime and ask them to self-report happiness, those two factors, wealth or prestige or being famous, in fact, physical health, in fact, social, like climbing the ladder. They had in these surveys in the Harvard study, had people went to prison, they had people had cancer, they had like all sorts of outcomes, right? And they couldn't find anything that was actually positively and significantly correlated with self-reported measures of happiness. That's such a fascinating study when you think about it. Like 80% millennials are just banking their life goal on I want to become rich. 50% on I want to become famous. And all the research you can read in positive psychology is going to say, it's going to help if you're above the poverty line for sure. And there's a little bit of an academic controversy where your happiness might improve a little bit as you make more money, but it's still kind of a pretty well-known result that, yeah, it definitely flattens out. And for our audience, Jeremy went sideways with his hand. So remind that this is also an audio podcast. So it flattens out. The question is, what is the number one factor that came out of the Harvard study? The current curator is Robert Waldinger. He's got a book out that I highly recommend, The Good Life. The number one factor, Jeremy, drumroll, of people's self-reported happiness in their life is the quality of their relationships.
Yeah.
It's positive human relationships. So we're talking about goals. It's early in the year. We're setting annual goals. We're making them measurable. Fine. But think about a long-term life goal of fostering positive relationship in your life. That might be the number one thing you can do for your long-term ability to thrive. It's not the type of goal we think about at the turn of the year. We think about, I got to lose weight. I'm thinking about right now, I've never done this. I'm pretty good at watching what I eat, but this year I want to try to actually count my macros, not count like in detail, but be more careful about the macro. I eat more protein, basically like how I split my diet.
Yeah.
I know I'm not going to do it perfectly. Okay. That's a typical turn of the year goal. But the goal I want to put in everybody's head right now, that everybody think about this, foster positive relationships in your life. Don't, just be nice for the sake of being nice. Positive relationships sometimes mean honesty and having difficult conversations. It's not about being just agreeable. But if you think about that goal, and I've thought about this a lot with my family over the holidays, I'm so happy to have the family together and spend time together on the ski slopes, right? That's a real meaningful goal that we don't think about enough or talk about enough.
I love that. So you hit on so many different things in there. I used to often ask the people the question, would you rather be rich or happy? And an astounding probably 80 to 90% of the people said rich. And I said, why would you choose being rich over being happy? They're like, because then I get to be rich, which will also make me happy. I'm like, but you could jump right to the thing. You could jump right to the happiness. And they don't see it. They want to be rich and then hopefully also be happy. It's amazing to me.
And the crazy thing, if you read research, for example, by Arthur C. Brooks, he's a Harvard professor. And did you know that they teach a class on happiness at Harvard?
Oh, nice.
Apparently it's oversubscribed, like 450 students on the wait list.
I bet.
But he will say, and also Sean Aker, who's got a book on this, it's not that being rich will make you happy. It's actually the opposite. Happy people tend to succeed. You have to reverse that equation. I have a chapter on this in the psychology of leadership. I like to talk about Agassi because it's one of the best memoirs of all time, Open. He talks about his career as a tennis player. He was miserable. He hated playing tennis. He hated the game. He hated tennis, but he was rich and successful. And so why is that, right? And there's something called goal-induced blindness that's very well documented in the literature and psychology, where you're so obsessed with your measurable goal that you lose sight of everything else that might matter in your life. Anyways, Jeremy, I kind of jumped in. I think you were gonna say a little bit more.
Yeah, but now I don't remember, which is totally fine because this is more interesting.
That's a good sign. It means you're attentively listening.
Yeah, I try. Which it's a tough balance doing a podcast to really attentively listen, but also be ready with something else. But, we all do our best. So how large is the team that you lead?
So I'm on the management committee of Rowe Price, and we have 7,200 employee. I manage a team of about 100 people that is responsible for about a third of our assets.
Do
And so that's,
you
yep.
don't manage them directly though, I imagine.
Yeah, I do.
You have
And
100 reports?
in terms of direct reports, that's an interesting question. So I had initially about 14 direct reports, and I've done a reorganization where now I have only 6. If you look at organizations, most of them have about 6 per leader.
Yeah. 6 is about the manageable number, but I've found most companies have more than that, and it's unmanageable and stressful. But
Look, it depends. It depends on the job. Some jobs can be performed more independently. I've seen flat organizations work. I think it's generally true that, 6 is more manageable and that it's better than, say, 14. I've seen leaders have 30. It depends. Jensen Huang is running the best company in the world. Apparently has over 100. So, there are always exceptions, but I agree with you, Jeremy. The general rule is 6 is actually a good number. That's why I reduced mine from
I
14
like
to
it.
6.
And so they are managing people who may also be managing other people. How did you learn to become a good manager and leader? And what do you do to help the people on your team develop their management and leadership skills?
So I've been leading teams. I've been in the business for about 25, leading teams for about 23. I've learned along the way. And what I've come to realize over the last few years, especially by writing The Psychology of Leadership, is that what we think is an important leadership skill, often we find that it's the exact opposite.
How so?
Very counterintuitive. So, for example, we think of the leader as the extrovert who's really good at communicating. And the reality is that as you go up the ladder in an organization, it's much less about you. It's much more about your ability to empower others to do great things. And it's way more about listening than talking. And that took me years to realize. And I've only come to realize that in recent years. We also have this view of the leader who's never quits, They're so resilient, they don't give up. She's amazing because in the face of all adversity, she kept the organization going. The best leadership skill you can develop that's the most underrated is knowing when to quit. It's so difficult in business when you invested in projects and you've sunk resources into initiatives and in the bottom of your heart they're not going to work, and the right thing to do for the business is to shut something down, stop a project, reinvest the resources in a more promising project. This ability to quit, not to persevere, to quit, is the hardest thing. That is the prized high-level leadership skill. And credit to Annie Duke. She has a book titled Quit, and she was so great because she's one of my favorite authors, and she wrote a blurb for The Psychology of Leadership. So I was super happy with this. But please go and read her book, Quit, about how difficult it is making decisions under uncertainty. It's harder to quit than to just stick to it. So again, one more thing where you think traditional sort of leadership advice is just don't give up, right? And really the prized skill is to quit. Then there's other things like we think the leader should not be stressed, should be calm under pressure. Not at all. In fact, research shows that up to a point, stress increases performance for highly
Up to a
skilled
point, yes.
people. For highly skilled people, if they're not engaged enough, not motivated enough, a little bit of stress is actually going to make them perform better. Now, you just intervene, Jeremy, to say up to a point. And it is the fact that stress will kill you eventually. It's very unhealthy if it's in excess. It will impact your appetite. It will impact your sleep. It will impact your relationships, your self-control, it's just bad for you, right? But what's underestimated is that, first of all, going through life at a stress level of 0 is impossible because that's not the human condition. And second, whether it's sports or other areas of life, increasing your stress level will increase your performance. Again, up to a point. There's
Yeah.
research behind this. It's called the Yerkes-Dodson's curves. It's been researched for decades in psychology. Athletes are really interested in this because, for example, if I ask you to run a 100-meter dash, it's proven that if your adrenaline is pumping and you're really nervous about your performance and your heart rate is going up and your focus is increasing, because by the way, when stress increases, fight or flight response, your focus increases. Your body is getting prepared to do something that's hard. Your mind is focusing. You're going to run the 100-meter dash faster than if you're completely relaxed. And that also applies to cognitive tasks as well.
Jumping back a little bit when you're talking about the most underrated skills of leadership, a phrase that I like to say is that good managers know the right answers and good leaders know the right questions to ask. And it goes back to the listening and getting the most out of your people rather than being able to tell them how to do a thing. But going to the stress, people only use the word stress, but it's short for either distress or eustress. And eustress is the good kind, like if you're skydiving or, doing something, it's stress, but it's good. It helps you to perform better. It's the distress that people always associate with of it, just like you talked about, it can wreck your life by just being overpowering and going on for too long. But I like what you said. It's very important to recognize that there's good stress and there's bad stress, and you need to just be conscious of which one that you are allowing into your lives.
Absolutely. And you know what sports psychologists do? They reframe it and they encourage you to reframe it. So they will say activation as opposed to stress per se. And if you can reframe it as excitement, for example,
Right.
it's going to help you cope with it. I have to do live national TV for my day job in money management. That's pretty stressful because you get 3 minutes to make a point and you never know what they're going to ask, no matter how well prepared you are. And it's there for the world to see.
Mm-hmm.
I get really stressed, really nervous every time, but I reframe it as activation. I have breathing exercises that I do that no one notices. I'm doing 4x4 box breathing, inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 4 seconds, exhaling for 4 seconds, holding at the bottom for another 4 seconds. Do that a few times. And I am convinced that I do better on the air if I'm activated. Think about it, Jeremy. If your surgeon's about to do a surgery on you and they're absolutely relaxed about it, like to a point where they're a little bored with the procedure, they're probably not going to do as well as if there's a certain level of, call it activation, where they're like, I got to do this right. And mentally, it's proven like your focus increases with stress.
Yeah.
So you want them to look at the charts, you want them to prepare, you want them to feel activated, you want them to be on. Now, the interesting thing with those Yerkes-Dodson curve, right, which show performance as a function of stress, and they show performance can increase from 0 stress to a little bit of stress and then decreases when you choke, when you panic, right? Well, they look different for different people, first of all, and they look different for different tasks. The power lifter needs a lot of activation, full on adrenaline. And you see them psych themselves up before they do the lifts, right? Yeah. But the archery, for example, it's still not 0, but the optimal performance is going to occur with some level of activation and focus. So it depends on the task. It also depends on the people. I talk about Neil Armstrong in the Psychology of Leadership. When the first manned moon landing occurred, famously, everything went wrong. The lunar module went off course, and then they lost communication. Computers stopped working. They ran out of fuel. Armstrong had to take over and land the thing in the wrong spot. And then we know what happened. He got out of the module and says, one small step for a man, giant leap for mankind. And it's a critical moment in human history. Although, by the way, Jeremy, I've learned some people think it didn't happen. I said that in a podcast recently, and then I went to see the comment, and it was like, does he really think this happened? I don't know. I think it happened. So Armstrong was hooked to a heart rate monitor for most of the mission.
Mm-hmm.
And when all of this was happening, his average heart rate stayed basically at a resting at 75. For him, it
Wow.
probably was activated. His resting's probably in the low 40s.
Yeah.
Because he's probably very athletic, but still like 75. It only spiked at the last minute when he landed the thing. It spiked to 150. But so
Nice.
Armstrong had Yerkes-Dodson curves, performance versus stress level that looked pretty different from yours and mine. And then the question is, how can I improve my stress tolerance and be more like Neil Armstrong, like move my curve to the left where I get more performance for less stress involved? And then there are all sorts of exercises and techniques, and that's where sports psychology gets really interesting in terms of just coping and improving your Yerkes-Dodson curve. So different curves for different tasks, different curves for different people, and you can improve your curves.
So I am sad to say that we're starting to run out of time because there's so many things that I want to talk and ask about. I like what you said about reframing, and I'm going to reframe the word quit because quit has such a negative connotation. I like to say prune. You've got all these branches on the tree of what you're doing, and no tree will survive and be healthy if you don't prune it. So thinking of quitting, reframing that to pruning, I think is very useful for people to say, this is actually going to make everything else stronger rather than just giving up. Because like you said, a lot of successful people tend to be stubborn and not give up on things even when they should.
Yeah, I really like that word pruning instead of just quitting. And if you think of how Amazon does things, Amazon will launch famously 20 different initiatives, and they don't really know which ones are going to work. And then they see how customers react, and they immediately prune, to use your word, those that aren't promising, and then double up on those that start getting traction.
Yeah.
And this is one of the best companies in the world, so they must be on to something.
Yep. They might have learned it from GE as well.
Yeah.
So sadly, we do need to start wrapping up. I'm wondering if you can let everybody know where they can learn more about you and about the sports psychology and things that we've been talking about.
So I'm on social media. Best way to find me is probably on LinkedIn. And the book, The Psychology of Leadership, is available anywhere. Easiest way to get it is probably Amazon. Speaking of.
Great. And then my last question is, if there's one piece of communication advice that we can all benefit from, what do you think that would be?
Okay, I'm going to give you, for those who are going to go into business or who are in business, I'm going to give you something I gave a group of MIT students recently. No one does it, and it's a small tweak, and it'll improve the quality of your presentations by like 30 or 40% immediately. It's so simple. So assuming you're using a PowerPoint, clear the slide. Every time you show a new slide, tell us what's on the slide. The x-axis shows, the y-axis shows before you start explaining anything. This actually focuses your audience on what they're looking at, and you bring them along with you. It's such a simple trick, clearing the slides. If you do it, everybody just clear your slides. Any meeting tomorrow at work, clear the slides and watch what happens. People will pay attention.
So to be clear, when you say clear the slide, you're not talking about like making a blank page. You're just talking, when you say clear the slide, you mean tell them what to focus on within the slide?
Yes. What does the slide mean, especially if you're using charts and graphs? Now, by the way, I'm not a huge fan of PowerPoint, but there's no way around it in business. If you have guts, just go without the PowerPoint. But if you have to go with the PowerPoint, every time you flip the slide, tell us what's on it, especially if it's a chart. This chart shows, the x-axis shows, even if it's on the slide. It's just such a simple thing, and it actually really, really works. And I was just looking at the MIT students presenting, and they weren't clearing any of the slides. They were just flipping and starting to explain. So now I'm in the audience. I start to read the slide because I don't know what's on it, and it's asynchronous. I'm no longer with the presenter.
Right. I like that. That's a good one. And it's so often that it's the small tweaks that make such a huge difference
Super
in
small.
life and work, presentations, everything else. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for being on. There's so much more to talk about that I think I'm going to reach out in a while and try to have you back.
Thank you, Jeremy. This was a lot of fun, and thanks to everybody in our audience.
Thanks for listening. If today's conversation resonated with you, share this episode with one person on your team who might benefit from it. And if you're leading a technical team and want to explore how these communication principles could work in your organization, visit www.neuroconvergentleadership.com to learn more. And there you can reach out to schedule an appointment. I'd be happy to talk through what might be going on in your world. See you next week.